The Energon Crisis. Right, so we're going to be covering what is Energon, the mystical origins, its part to play in the Great War for Cybertron. We're going to be covering different types of Energon, otherwise known as basically different variants and their effects. Right, and then we'll also be covering why the general factions fight over it, and then we'll be covering key events that consist and play with, well, I mean, Energon. That's the point of the video, right? The Energon Crisis. So this video is going to be covering, or obviously, the lore of like War and Fall of Cybertron, right? Much appreciated. Thank you, Barry's. You will be missed for giving me this playlist. I will continue it, hopefully in a good form and faith. Hopefully I can live up to expectations, but we will be utilizing Transformers Exiles, Transformers Exodus, Retribution, and the Covenant of Primus, right, alongside the game comics for lore. I will also be pulling from stuff like the TF Wiki and other places. I'm going to be honest, I know there are issues with it, and I know there might be like continuity and plot point issues because some things are listed incorrectly, but it's a lot to take in, it's a lot for me, so if I do get something wrong in terms of like how the continuity is meant to play out regarding these, I know like Prime and the Align continuity, it's weird because it didn't follow, but it did, there's some contradictions. Literally just let me know in the comments, right? Because like I'm not going to be able to learn unless you guys correct me, because otherwise there's just a lot of conflicting stuff from like official sources or fan sources. So as I go along, as this playlist builds out, right, as this series builds out, I will eventually be able to like recognize plot points, and I'll slowly but surely will be getting it like on track, I guess, to like definitive proper lore. But like in the beginning, if I do get things wrong, literally just put it in the comments, let me know, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to like learn and know. There's so much initially to get into this lore wise that like just reading up on Exiles, Exodus, Retribution, and the like Covenant of Promise, oh my, it's just like, oh, it's so much, and then linking it into the games, and then like certain things like with the comics as well. So either way, anyway, that's what we got going on. Hopefully you guys enjoy, so let's get into it. They're all after this stuff called Energon, kind of like food and gas and blood and, well, electricity all mixed into one, as one human ally put it. So, Energon is the lifeblood of the Transformers universe, and nowhere is it more, well, important and more evident than in the War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron saga. In this video, I'll be basically deep diving into the glowing cubes and crystals that fuel Cybertronian life, right? Exploring the science, lore, and mythology behind Energon. From its cosmic origins within Primus and Unicron to the bitter battles fought over it by the Autobots and Decepticons, to the exotic forms, be that Dark Energon, Synth Energon, and Tox N. I'll be unraveling everything you'll need to know about this mysterious substance. Right, so that leads us into what is Energon, right? From physical properties and its role to play in general like Cybertronian society. At its core, Energon, well, in the Transformers, is basically the primary fuel source and like energy source, right? It's their literal food, it's their power supply, it's their currency, basically all mixed into one. It can take many different forms, right? From like raw ore to like a crystalline set of like deposits or gas or just pure energy, but it's commonly like used in like a refined liquid state, often stored in like obviously the famously glowing Energon cubes. These like luminous cubes and crystals are basically like a common sight in Cybertronian culture, powering everything from simple like households to like entire cities and even obviously weapons of war, which we'll be getting into, right? So Energon, if you didn't know, is highly volatile, right? Mishandling it can cause explosion, like, well, basically just explosive results, right? It generally like, so like the volatility, right, means, well, I mean, I'm sure we can see where this is going, right? That Energon isn't just a fuel, but also a weapon, right? So in battle, like Transformers have weaponized it as like ammo and even grenades, right? There's even like the grenades that heal allies, right? By bathing them in Energon radiation, right? We've seen these in the game, if you guys have played them, right? So in peaceful times, however, right, it was basically the foundation of society and like commerce, right? Like trade. So like during Cybertron's golden age, right, Energon was so abundant that it basically doubled as the planet's currency and was freely like transmitted across the globe through specialized arrays like the geosynchronous Energon bridges, right? So it truly like permeates basically every aspect of the Cybertronian like life experience, like from their technology and basically their economy. Right, so scientifically, if you can think of like Energon as like a potent self-contained energy source, right, say basically food, electricity all mixed into one, right, like to quote the humans, right, Well, I guess us in this case, but you know what I mean. It carries basically a unique spectrographic signature that only Cybertronian life emits, right? Obviously, if you've seen from other continuities, right, it's their entire like DNA structure, right? That's kind of like, I'm sure you guys are following, but in fact, basically like no other known beings like use Energon, right? So it is basically like, it's traces like on other worlds, right? It's basically, if you see it, like they're basically immediately suspect like Cybertronian activities, right? Like if you see Energon elsewhere, you're like, okay, Cybertronians have been here. Okay, so like Optimus Prime's crew, like he does like exactly this, right, when he finds Energon Witch like world signatures, right? So like when he travels, like he realizes like, okay, traveled X here, okay, like when they go off planet, oh, spot Energon, okay, that must be like a lost Cybertronian colony world, right? Or at least a colony in general, like they must have like formulated a colony there, because otherwise why would Energon be there? Doesn't make any sense, right? So like, I guess a fun fact, right, Energon like even flows through like Cybertronian bodies like blood. I'm sure you've seen this in the games as well, like maybe it's a clip on screen. Like when you're injured, Transformers may bleed like glowing Energon, right? Like, and then after death, they remain, like the remaining Energon in their body, like slowly decays, right? It's not like they basically like slowly bleed out, right? Like, so you can see like, when you heal with like Autobot medics, like Ratchet, right? He can examine a fallen like comrade, right? Fading Energon's signature, and then he can like examine that to determine the time of death, right? Basically a bit of like NCIS Cybertron at this point. It's basically like a reminder that Energon isn't just an external fuel source, but it's like immediately tied to their biology. Again, it's basically like it's like food, electricity, it's like their DNA structure, like it's just all like encompassed in one. Okay, so like with that, right, let's move on to like its mystical origins, right? So like Primus, the Allspark, Unicron's blood, etc., right? So Energon's story begins in like basically myth, right? At the very creation of Cybertronian life, like according to the Covenant of Primus, the ancient Cybertronian holy text, in where the god creator Primus formed the first Transformers, right? The 13 Primes. He filled their bodies with life-giving Energon. In a blinding burst of golden light, Energon fills our bodies with life and power, right? Primus's work is done. That's end quote. It basically recounts the Covenant, right? In other words, basically, true Energon is essentially an emanation of like Primus's own essence, right? It's basically him himself. It's like it's his life force in essence, right? Like the divine spark of life made liquid, as a quote per se. So this sacred view of Energon explains why it's so like miraculous in terms of like the things, and like obviously more on that soon, like in terms of what it can do, but and why Cybertronians consider it almost sacred, right? Because obviously think of it as like your god's life force. Of course they're going to be like, you know, they're going to respect it, they're going to like, understandable, right? So, but if Primus's lifeblood, right, became pure Energon, well, his dark twin Unicron left behind a twisted counterpart. This is Dark Energon. So, in mythic times, Primus, otherwise known as Cybertron, battled the Chaos Bringer Unicron. When Unicron was defeated and expelled from Cybertron, traces of his dark essence remained. The sparks of Unicron that drifted through space and coalesced into like an unholy substance, right? So the Covenant and other ancient texts warn that for every force there is an opposite. So regular Energon is life-giving, so the opposite, Dark Energon, corrupts and defiles life, right? These floating remnants of Unicron eventually became known as Dark Energon, right? Whispered of it as in through legend, it was known as basically the blood of Unicron. So, Dark Energon is depicted as basically malevolent, glowing purple substance, like it's a glowing purple substance with like incredible power, right? And basically you pay a terrible price. In the Covenant, it said that to carry the corrupting, it says to carry, quote, the corrupting energies of Unicron's aura, end quote. Even the 13 Primes feared its corruption. Solus Prime forged special armor infused with Dark Energon for her brethren to wield in battle, hoping to shield them from Unicron's influence. I mean, good strategic strategy, right? Use it against Unicron, you know, it's part of him. So like, imagine that. Using poison as protection though, it's kind of wild. But like this paradoxical like tactic shows how dangerous Dark Energon's corruption can be, right? You're using it to protect against it. Like only Dark Energon itself could ward off Unicron's evil ambition. Only basically Unicron himself could ward himself off. It's kind of wild to think about, right? So like millennia later, knowledge of Dark Energon was virtually lost. Perhaps on purpose? Who knows? So, ancients who encountered it decided that it was too dangerous, right? So they sealed it away in secret, possibly to why it ended up being lost. So, one story tells of an early scientific expedition that gathered all that could... Basically, they gathered everything they could find on, like, Unicron's dark matter. And then they basically hid it within Cybertron's moons. They did this at a place called Triptychon Station. Oh my god, okay. So obviously Triptychon Station, yeah, that's where I'm sure if you played the games we know. So so we move on. Archivist Alpha Trion even erased records of Dark Energon from the great like datanet. So, I mean, that tells you, like, bro did not want anyone, like, looking into this. Clearly, this was not meant to, you know, staying under wraps when your boy Alpha got on that. So, yeah, in essence, he was just hoping that no one would rediscover, like, the anti-Energon, per se. But, obviously, we can see where this is going. For millions of years, Dark Energon itself became, like, a half-forgotten, like, boogeyman of the history books, right? That was until the War for Cybertron. Right, that segue, boys, goes right into the War for Cybertron and, well, the Energon Crucibles. Okay, so fast forward to the era of the Great War. Cybertron's golden ages of harmony, well, I mean, they're over. Now the Autobots and Decepticons wage a planet-spanning conflict. And what do? Well, what do they fight above all else? Energon. Right? As battles raged, both factions knew that controlling every energy supply meant victory. Right? Basically just, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just like economics, I can't remember, I'll remember it later. Basically, like, strategic, like, targets shifted to basically, like, mere territories to, like, they didn't really care about territories at that point. It basically became, like, refineries, storage depots, and power plants, right? It was all about the, like, energy and, like, economics of the war. Okay, so, like, one pivotal campaign described in Transformers Exodus was the Battle of Calais. So this city housed vast energon reserves and was basically like an essential fusion reactor powering the Autobot capital of Iacon. Okay, so Optimus Prime and Megatron each threw their best armies at Calais, fully aware that whoever held it would fuel the war effort, while the enemy, like, basically spurted out. It basically cannibalized whatever side got it, right? So in a rare turn, the Autobots triumphed, right? So there, their first major victory took place, partially by exploiting Decepticon, like, weaknesses and Starscream's absence in, like, the air. So the win brought the Autobots, like, precious time and energon, because again, energon is basically the equivalent of, like, being able to sustain the war. Energon is time, right? If you think of, like, money as time in, like, a general, like, economic state, again, energon, money, trade, everything, power, fuel, you can understand, right? You can understand, that makes sense. So with that being said, this war brought the Autobots precious time, right? Proving that basically energon-rich territories was worth, like, any cost in battle, right? Because again, it's all good having, like, major cities and that, but if you can't power them, if you can't, like, sustain your army, what's the point? So by the final days of the war, however, Cybertron's once peaceful energon was like, oh, not peaceful, once plentiful energon was basically nearly exhausted, okay? There was basically virtually no energon left, right? It's crazy to think about. It basically consumed it all in this, like, planetary civil war, okay? So with that being said, so yeah, okay, factories went dark for the lack of power. Even military production ground to a halt as energon grew, well, I quote, increasingly rare and precious, end quote. The planet itself was dying, right? It drained by millions of cycles of conflict. We see this, like, desperation primarily in Fall of Cybertron, right? So where the Autobots' last hope is the Ark, a massive ship to evacuate their people. But there isn't, like, basically there isn't enough energon, right, left to launch it. They made it, but there's just not enough to power it. So in the game's opening, Optimus scrambles to defend the last drop of Energon loading into the Ark's tanks. He actively awakens Metroplex, the gigantic titan, who ends up helping, right? He turns the tide of the battle. Yet even victory, right, the victory of that, activating Metroplex, right, he consumes so much Energon that the Ark still, like, can't take, you know what I mean? Like, it's wild to think about that that's, like, the level they were going. So, right, in a powerful, like, obviously seen in Fall of Cybertron, right, Metroplex, he sacrifices himself, right? He transfers all his remaining Energon to the Ark as a final act to fuel its launch, to finally get it off the ground, right? Their last hope. Which is like, it's crazy. Like he had to give his last energy. That's how little Energon was left at this point. Right? To think of how rich the planet was before and to the end of this like millennia cycle war. So like his heroic sacrifice underlines basically how critical Energon was. Right? An ancient Titan basically gave his spark so the Autobots had enough power just to leave Cybertron at all. Right? Ultimately, the Great War literally bled Cybertron dry. In like a last bid to save their world, Optimus Prime ejected the Allspark, right, the planet's life-giving core, into space, putting Cybertron's essence beyond Megatron's reach. With the core dormant and Energon depleted, Cybertron fell into basically a healing slumber. Right? So both factions boarded their ships and took the war to the stars. Searching for new Energon sources, and, well, obviously the Allspark. They basically did this then rather than letting their race basically flicker out into nothingness, right? They would have all ended up dying due to, like, the planet slumbering and just no Energon, right? They would have ended up going into, like, stasis and then corroding away. Thus, the Exodus began. It's a tragic end to basically a once golden planet reduced to rust in essence and ruin by the very thing that gave it life. So with that being said, I want to cover a few different types of Energon and variants in their effects, because I thought it was pretty cool. Think of this more like a tech spec stats kind of like extra. I like that kind of stuff. So not all Energon is created equal, right? Over the eons, Cybertronians encountered multiple forms of this miracle substance. Some natural, some man-made, and, well, some unnatural. Each type has its own, like, unique quirks and effects to those who use it. So let's break down some key variants of Energon seen in War for Cybertron, Fall of Cybertron, and the Expanded Lore. So standard blue Energon, right? Say live Energon. So the everyday Energon fueling most Cybertronians is often called standard or like live Energon. Typically depicted as blue in color in the aligned continuity, War for Cybertron, Fall of Cybertron games, novels, etc. This is the refined form of raw Energon that bots ingest or load into their systems. It's stable as long as it's handled properly and nourishing. On Cybertron, it was mined from natural Energon crystal deposits, jagged blue like geodes that could basically be refined into liquid form. So with that, Decepticons developed methods to fabricate empty Energon cubes and then fill them by converting other raw energy sources. So in G1, Soundwave famously collected Earth's electricity into cubes. In the games, we saw Energon processing factories, turning crystals into reusable Energon packs. The standard Energon is what courses through a Transformer's body and powers their spark. It basically consists of, like, it's the purest state. Right? It can even produce power-ups and transformations. For example, ancient Cybertronian knights could overcharge on raw Energon for a temporary strength boost. But those cases are rare, so generally blue Energon is the safe, vital fuel source that basically every bot regulates with, regularly. It's the most common basic form of Energon that is well known. When reserves run low, so Transformers will grow weak, and then they can even enter a space of stasis lock, coma-like shutdown. Right, I kind of touched on this before, right? To conserve energy, right? Because if they completely run out, they're gone. So like we witnessed this in the games where the characters urgently hunt for Energon pickups to avoid like low energy warnings. In essence, it's a gameplay nod to how dependent they are on it, right? When you're low health. So, you know, it's a cool way to integrate the lore. With that, we move on to Dark Energon, otherwise known as the Blood of Unicron. So perhaps like the most infamous variant is Dark Energon. I think if you know basic Energon, the only other one you could probably know for like most people is Dark Energon. It's the one you think of outside of main Energon. So like it's the violet purple energy source that became Megatron's obsession in War for Cybertron. I mean, he literally like suicided like his cruiser just to be able to like get a hold of that station, which is pretty insane. It is believed to be the very blood of Unicron. Dark Energon is incredibly potent, right? Deeply corrupting. In War for Cybertron, Megatron discovers a cache of Dark Energon hidden in an orbital station, Triptychon Station, right? So Starscream, then a mere station commander, warns that no one can control Dark Energon, right? It had basically never been used before for a good reason, but Megatron's sheer will proves stronger. In a chilling scene, he immerses himself in Dark Energon, his body glowing with like this chaotic power, right? Visualized in game as like crackling purple lightning. Empowered, Megatron like gleefully turns Dark Energon into a weapon. He's well happy with that. He infects Cybertron's planetary core, intending to like dark energize the planet and its like systems and subsystems. His logic being like a corrupted Cybertron under his command and limitless power to crush the Autobots. But obviously, like, well, the results are catastrophic. Upon Megatron poisoning the core, Cybertron itself begins to darken. The planet's once bright energy grids basically falter, and a malevolent purple seeps through Cybertron's infrastructure. Right, the game shows this as like Dark Energon growths on levels after Megatron's assault. You see like those crystal growths and stuff like that. It's kind of like crazy to see. The planet's consciousness, obviously Primus, shuts down into dormancy to avoid total corruption. Optimus Prime is tasked with cleaning up this mess. So the Exodus novel notes how Optimus was effectively trying to cure Cybertron of its Dark Energon infection. In the War for Cybertron campaign, we see Autobots venture into the core to stabilize it. They halt the immediate corruption, right? Cybertron is then left in a comatose state, basically just like a vegetable state. Okay, there we go. We'll go with that. Requiring millions of years to heal. So Dark Energon's effect on living beings, right, not just the planet, is basically just as dramatic. It augments power exponentially. Megatron basically becomes virtually invincible in War for Cybertron after taking it. Able to slay scores of enemies and even fell the mighty Omega Supreme. However, it also warps their mind and body. In some continuities, Dark Energon can reanimate the dead, turning fallen Transformers into mindless Terracon zombies under whomever controls the Dark Energon. So, like in the Prime TV series, Megatron uses a shard of Dark Energon to raise an army of undead Cybertronian corpses. A truly, like, grisly power, per se, right? So the Exodus novel describes Dark Energon as great power at an unknown cost, right? So ancient records hinted at convey a link to Unicron's essence, meaning that it could basically make a user a conduit of Unicron's will. This is perhaps a real danger, right, by using Dark Energon, right? If anything else was like positives with some setbacks, this is like a real key like sticking point, right? Megatron risked becoming a puppet of the very Chaos Bringer. Unfortunately for everyone, Dark Energon is exceedingly rare. Fortunately for everyone, Dark Energon is exceedingly rare, right? After Megatron's stunt, no new sources were readily found, until much later on Earth. When Cybertron darkened, it stopped producing even normal energon for a time, as if the planet's basically lifeblood had been poisoned. Dark energon gave Megatron a short-term win, but ultimately helped burn out Cybertron, a classic, basically, hollow victory, per se? Right, like, yeah, he got Cybertron, but there was nothing there, it was dead, you know. At what cost did him winning the Great War get him? You know, there was nothing left, they had to go off planet. Kind of a hollow victory in essence. I mean, maybe a victory, but at what cost? With that being said, let's move on to synthetic energon, or synth energon, or otherwise known as like man-made power and problems per se, right? Because we'll touch on that. So with natural energon like scarce, it's no wonder that the Transformers turned their like science towards creating an artificial like substitute. So enter synth energon, synthetic energon, often nicknamed synth energon or synth N. In the aligned continuity, a formula for synth N was developed during the war, intended to be an alternate fuel. However, it was never mass-produced. The formula was it was instead basically hidden away on like a data cylinder launched off-world as the war grew dire. Perhaps the scientists feared it could be basically misused. Basically, they were just really concerned about it, so I guess we shall see how that turned out. But long after, in the Transformers Prime era, Autobot medic Ratchet rediscovers this formula and brews up a batch of this bright, glowing green synth energon. Initially, synth N appears to work. Ratchet gains remarkable boost in like strength and speed upon testing it on himself. It even basically like heightens his mental like processing speed, which is kind of crazy. However, though, the benefits did end up coming with like unpredictable side effects. Ratchet, like, he basically becomes aggressive, overconfident, and borderline unstable, essentially intoxicated by the power. The effect is temporary, and the crash is just as intense. It's basically a mix of like steroids and sugar, right? Like he had like an insane like stamina boost, and then boom, the sugar crash came in, and that's kind of what it like almost pulls from that. That's the way I see it anyway. So in like Ratchet's words, synthetic energon's formula was incomplete. It could never replicate the real thing's stability, right? Like real energon stability. It didn't have that. Moreover, when mixed with dark energon, synthetic energon produced a deadly reaction. As an experiment by the Decepticons showed in Transformers Prime, in short, synth energon, it's a violent prototype, and in essence a testament to Cybertronian ingenuity and the lengths they'll go for energon, right? Like they're taking these unstable substances just to survive, right? And to fuel this like ongoing war effort conflict. But ultimately, it's just too dangerous and morally fraught to like replace the natural energon, right? Like it's just never going to be a proper replacement, right? Like the amount of side effects it causes, you know what I mean? Like they just can't be doing that. So like, fun aside though, in like other continuities, different synthetic energon projects like exist. Okay, so there are different like energon projects. Like, so for example, in one comic storyline, a new energon created by Shockwave empowered combiners, right? But these are like separate from the aligned continuity universe, and like in the War for Cybertron, Fall of Cybertron lore, the only synthetic energon mentioned in this was the one from the like the data cylinder Ratchet found. So maybe we'll just kind of leave it there. Moving on though, we have Toxin. This one's pretty cool. So now for the very nasty variant, right? Toxin, short for toxic energon. If dark energon is the blood of a god, Toxin is more like radioactive waste per se. It's a rare form of energon that is lethal to Transformers. Toxin is a sickly green in color, often emitting noxious vapors. So to organic beings, humans, etc., it's basically harmless, which is kind of ironic. But to Cybertronians, it's essentially poison in crystalline form. Even touching a small chunk of Tox-N causes dizziness and weakness. Prolonged exposure can even paralyze a bot and eventually extinguish their spark, in essence killing them, right? So nasty stuff. Tox-N's origin aren't like entirely clear. Some speculate it's basically a byproduct of Energon refining gone wrong, or it's like a naturally occurring mutated Energon from the war-torn regions of Cybertron. During the war, Megatron somehow obtained raw Tox-N and then refined it into a bioweapon, right? This toxin bomb devastated Autobot troops, so the Autobots later secured a sample and locked it in the vault on Cybertron. Fast forward to after the Exodus, that sample ended up hidden on Earth as like an icon relic. In one Transformers Prime episode, Toxicity, Bulkhead is dispatched to retrieve this relic, only to discover it's a container of pure Tox-N. The episode harrowingly portrays Bulkhead struggling uphill with this relic as its deadly radiation saps him of his strength. Just holding Tox-N nearly kills him, and by the end he's barely functional and needs months of recovery. He does manage to use it as like a makeshift grenade against Insecticon. So yeah, with that being said, like proving that in the wrong hands, Tox-N is like a fearsome weapon. Thankfully though, Bulkhead destroys the majority of it afterwards, preferring to basically dispose of it on sight. Basically the only sane approach to Tox-N in my opinion, right? Like why are we keeping like toxic Energon turning into bioweapons? That's insane. We just need to get rid of that. So in the Covenant of Primus or like other aligned texts, Tox-N isn't explicitly discussed, so likely because like it was a war-era discovery. But it stands as like a cautionary tale that not all Energons shines like it's not beneficial to have Tox-N, right? So it's like some shines green and kills you, right? It's just like like, so obviously like yeah, just like if you see a glowing green Energon, just don't go near it. You know what I mean? Just get rid of it at all costs. Because I mean, I guess at least if you're not like human or like, you know what I mean. So for Transformers, you see toxic green chunks that are glowing, get rid of it or run away, get far away from it. So yeah, with that being said though, let's cover other Energon variants, right? So we've got a couple of others to cover. So like Red Energon, etc. So the aligned continuity and related media introduce a few other Energon types in passing. So one is Red Energon, a very rare crystalline form that when processed can like accelerate a Cybertronian speed dramatically, right? To the point of short-term hyperspeed, as experienced by Knockout in Transformers Prime. Now, unlike Tox-N, Red Energon isn't poisonous, it's more of like a turbo boost, but it's short-lived in effect and not commonly found. Another term fans encounter is basically dark, so Dark Spark Energy. This is from Rise of the Dark Spark, right, the crossover game, but that's tied to a different artifact rather than naturally occurring Energon, so we'll set that aside for now. The key takeaway is that Energon's like properties can like vary. Oh my god. They can, oh my god, I'm actually cooked. Dark Energon's properties can like vary widely depending on its sources and processes, right? So blue is the standard life giver, right? Purple, Dark Energon corrupts and empowers. Green, Tox-N poisons, and synthetic Energon attempts to glow neon green, but can come with side effects, right? This spectrum of like Energon types adds like a rich complexity to like the overall lore of it. Like it's not just a fuel in like the monolithic sense, but like it's a mysterious energy that can like behave in like wondrous or deadly ways depending on which Energon variant you come across. So with that being said, let's move on to like generally why factions fight over it. So by now it's like obvious why Energon is like a strategic prize in the war. Like it is literally life or death for Cybertronians. Control the Energon and you can build more weapons, construct more soldiers, keep your armies running, while your enemy starves and shuts down. Megatron knew this, Optimus Prime knew this. Many conflicts in War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron and the novels are driven by Energon scarcity or acquisition. So let's may as well just highlight a few of them. So we've got the Siege of Icon. In War for Cybertron, the Decepticon campaign focuses on breaking into Icon's energy stores. Megatron invades the Autobot capital, partly to steal the Omega Key and access the core, but also to seize Zeta Prime's energy reserves. Zeta had been hoarding Energon to ration it, causing resentment among his citizens, may I add. But Megatron literally siphons Energon from Zeta Prime during their duel, which is kind of funny. He using the High Council's supply lines. So, with that being said, this both weakens Zeta and refuels Megatron, right? Basically a double victory for the Decepticon leader. Then we also have the space bridge to war. So in Fall of Cybertron, when the Autobots attempt to launch the Ark, Decepticons launch a full-scale assault, not just to destroy the ship, but to capture its Energon fuel. Starscream and Shockwave both realize that even off-planet, hunting down Autobot Energon convoys could cripple Optimus's plan. Again, the supply line issue. One level in Fall of Cybertron has Decepticon flyers attacking an Autobot Energon transport en route to the Ark, forcing Cliffjumper and Jazz to intervene. It's like a game of starvation versus survival. Okay, so now we've also got off-world expeditions. So the war for Energon isn't just confined to Cybertron. The novel Transformers Retribution describes both factions arriving at an oceanic planet called Aquatron after detecting massive Energon readings. So they find an entire society apparently dedicated to producing Energon. So 20% surplus each cycle, in essence enough to last thousands of years, right? That's what they were dealing with. So for every war, for the war-weary Megatron and Optimus, this seems like hitting the jackpot, right? Giant stores of it, right? All ripe for the taking, right? Even Starscream salivates. The Decepticons nearly go berserk with greed at the prospect of securing that much fuel. Of course though, in this story it turns out to be a trap orchestrated by the Aquatrons, the Aquatron's manipulative ruler, and involves the Quintessons. But the incident shows how far both sides are willing to go, that they'll chase an Energon signal across the galaxy, risk unknown dangers, even walk into straight up traps. Such is the importance of Energon to their survival, right? So we also have defensive desperation. On the Autobot side, we see acts of great heroism tied to Energon as well, right? Remember Metroplex's sacrifice we discussed earlier? That wasn't just random, it was a cautious strategic choice, right? He realized that without him giving up to powering the Ark, the Autobot cause was in essence lost. It was over, right? So he gave up his own spark energy. And similarly, right, in the novels, Autobots would rather jettison the spark and contain every ounce of Energon off-world than let Megatron gain a monopoly on it. Optimus was willing to sacrifice Cybertron itself temporarily to deny Megatron's unlimited power. These sacrifices speak to Energon's value, right? Better to lose everything than let your enemy control all Energon. Simply put, Energon is the strategic currency of war. Every offensive, every counterstrike in War for Cybertron, Fall of Cybertron can be linked to Energon's supply lines. In the end, the war reached a stalemate, precisely because Cybertron ran out of Energon to fight over. No one could win, and so they had to leave in search of a new resource. Megatron's forces followed Optimus's Ark in the warship Nemesis, not just out of vengeance, but because Megatron needed the Ark's Energon and the Allspark to rebuild his empire. Thus, the conflict over Energon fueled an exodus that led the Transformers to, well, likely a little planet called Earth, but that is a story for another time. So, before we wrap up, let's cover some key events. Like, we'll touch on basically a few events from the Cybertron games and the expanded lore that center on Energon. First off, we have in Chapter 1 of Lore For Cybertron, which delivers an unforgettable moment. Megatron, determined to harness Dark Energon, stands before a pulsating Dark Energon core. Despite warnings that only the Dark Lord of the Chaos God could touch it, Megatron steps into the chamber. Purple energy surges through him and his eyes flare with an ominous violet. This is the birth of Dark Energon Megatron. Gameplay immediately demonstrates his new might as he annihilates Autobots with Dark Energon projectiles, right? When he pulls up the crystals and stuff. This scene basically not only is both badass and foreboding, right? But it's a key turning point in where Megatron crosses a line in pursuit of ultimate power, right? We also have like Omega Supreme versus Dark Energon, right, in Lore For Cybertron. So later in the Decepticon campaign, Megatron faces Omega Supreme, Guardian of Icon. The David vs. Goliath fight ends with Megatron actually infecting Omega Supreme with Dark Energon, corrupting the mighty Sentinel from within. Omega falters and crashes, allowing Megatron to claim victory. It's an intense battle showcasing Dark Energon as basically the equalizer that even a godlike Omega couldn't withstand. Then we have Optimus and the Core, right? So Lore For Cybertron and the Exodus book. In the Autobot campaign, Optimus ventures into Cybertron's core after Megatron's corruption. Okay, so this is to communicate with the dormant Primus. In like it's basically like a cinematic scene, right? You get to see like the core's voice names Optimus as Optimus Prime, charging him with saving the planet. So then the core shuts down to purge itself of Dark Energon, effectively putting Cybertron into a coma. This moment is huge for the lore, right? It's basically how Optimus truly becomes a Prime and confirms that Energon and its corruption is tied directly to the planet's life force. It's depicted beautifully in both of the games and the novel, with the core's chamber bathed in a golden light fading to dark as Primus goes silent. It's an emotional beat that underlines like the mystical side of Energon, right? Like, it's not something you often get to see. With that, we also have Metroplex heeds the call in Fall of Cybertron, right? So Chapter 2 gives us an epic awakening of Metroplex. Out of Energon and options, Optimus uses the last of the reservations to activate an ancient circuit, yelling Metroplex, heed the call of the last Prime. To every player's delight that played it, right? If you did, an entire city transformed giant raises up, right? Metroplex proceeds to utterly demolish Decepticon war cannons. At one point punches Megatron like a ragdoll mid-dialogue. The sheer scale and power of Metroplex is like a fist-pumping moment, right, when you first experience it. But it tinges with like the knowledge that his actions are draining Autobot Energon reserves rapidly because of his sheer size. This balance of triumph and cost is like a classic like Fall of Cybertron storytelling moment. And of course it sets up Metroplex's later sacrifice, another iconic moment we described when like he gives his spark and Energon to launch the arc, right? It's a build-up. You get to see like the initial and then the payoff. We also have Bulkhead's last stand, right, for like Prime's toxicity. Though not in the Lore For Cybertron Fall of Cybertron games, one aligned continuity universe scene, I guess we'll pull into this, worth mentioning, is Bulkhead versus Hardshell over the Toxin Relic. It's cinematic and it's like in its own right? Bulkhead carrying a lump of raw toxin the size of a football is visibly corroding, right? So green vapors eating away at him. Pursued by like an insectoid Decepticons, Bulkhead uses trickery and guts to survive, let's say. In the final face-off, a weakened Bulkhead hurls the toxin directly at the Insecticon and shoots it, causing a toxic explosion that takes out the enemy. At the very moment Bulkhead, he basically collapses. The camera pans over Bulkhead's limp body next to a smoldering crater where Toxin detonated, leaving viewers unsure if he survived. Well, he barely did. It's basically a stark illustration of how no one wins when Toxin is involved. Right? Bulkhead eliminated the threat, but nearly paid with his life. The dramatic tension here basically revolves around the deadly Energon variant. So like each of these scenes is made more powerful by the lore behind Energon. Now we as like viewers and fans understand the stakes of and the symbolism of like Megatron's powerful lust into dark Energon, right? Optimus Prime's connection to Primus through regular Energon, and then Metroplex's noble sacrifice of Energon and the extreme hazards of Tox Energon. With that being said, I'm going to call it there. I think that was quite extensive. If I missed anything or got anything wrong, let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think of this series in general. I've got a few more of these I'm going to make. I quite enjoy them, so you guys let me know. Same with like editing and everything. If you like the Transformers like Fall of Cybertron, War of Cybertron games, we've got the Discord link below. If you want to support the channel on screen, probably just join as a membership, you know, if you appreciate it. And if you've got any ideas for the series going forth, leave them in the comments. Hey, let me know, and more ideas the better, the more I'll get on it. With that being said, that's me. Peace.